Greetings in the love and in the light of the one infinite creator. I'm Andre, and today I'm joined by Simon Michaux, John Peach, Ivor Loffing, and more. Today we'll talk about peak oil topics, pay tribute to Michael Dowd, discuss the Saudi Prince videos on demand versus supply, and hear updates from Simon Michaux on sensitivity analysis. And then we'll have a Q&A. Okay. All right. Now we're just going to do the tribute to Michael Dowd. And just got to find the right window here. Sorry, there we go. Okay, share. And so Michael Dowd passed away October 8th. And we had done he was big on peak oil network. He interviewed lots of people, and he was all big on post doom, no gloom. And we had done an interview with him over here. And I also wanted to share this video from the this. I don't know if you could hear it, but well, there's the subtitles. And this is the Crown Prince of Saud, and he is talking about the oil situation and the difference between demand and supply. And so here he's basically right now in the media, there's a big talk about that peak oil demand, and that it will maybe slow down at 2030, or maybe it will keep going up. And then, then he talks about the supply side, and it's actually lost much more quickly. So U.S., he claims, will not be an oil-producing country in 10 years. It will produce instead of 20% of current production. And then by 2030, it'll be 0 barrels in China. And Russia, within 20 years, will be producing only 1 million barrels or less. So this is just kind of going to show that this is not a far out thing, that even the Crown Prince of Saud, Mohammed bin Salman, is aware of the oil supply issue. All right.
And he doesn't mention Saudi production declining, I don't think.
No. Yeah. So Saudi production is also declining, right?
Did he say so?
No. Well, I think he didn't mention in that video. He did mention how much it would decline. No. But he did say basically that there's a big difference between the demand side and the supply side.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So I think we're ready for Simon Michaux's presentation. You want to unmute?
Ready. We're ready.
All
Gosh,
right.
I thought you were going to go along with that. All right.
Well, I don't know. Did anyone have any comments on? But I don't know. Or Michael Dowd or anything else, or reminiscence?
It's always interesting when one of us stops presenting. Like if I got hit by a bus, or you got abducted by aliens or something, like the whole that's left behind. Like what happens?
Yeah.
Like I don't know about you guys, but I'm not even close to being done. It'd be a bit of a shame if I had to stop now. So I'm sure it was the same for Michael. So yeah. All right. Well, I never met the man, but rest in peace.
Mm-hmm. And one more thing I want to say about Michael Dowd is that I noticed that in the 2016 a lot of people died, and that was kind of the end of the cheap. That was the end of the peak net energy. So the cheapest food in the history of Earth was in 2015, and so 2016 was when we started to go on the downhill, and so I think a lot of people chose to end their incarnations like when they got to the top of the golden era, and then for Michael Dowd, it happened to be October 7th, October 8th, and that was the beginning of the Israel-Palestine conflict. And so, man. Yeah.
Well, I really liked Michael Dowd's presentation. At first, I didn't agree with it. I was kind of like, "Oh, come on, we can't give up. We got to keep trying to make miracles happen." And then I realized my own thinking. He's right. There isn't that much you can really do as a person who lives, at a modest level about what's going on. So I kind of agreed with his philosophy. And, the crazy thing is, when you get to, my age, it could happen anytime. Anyway, thank you. Thank you, Michael Dowd.
All right. So I guess you're up, Simon.
Right. Happy to roll. So let me share. Let's go on to... so are you actually seeing that?
Yeah, the green transition will not work as planned.
But what might we do instead?
And what might we do instead? That's right.
So, okay. So I've started to put together some information. People are demanding solutions. And what I'm finding, there are some solutions, but we refuse to look at them. And so we've got to get out of our own way. This is a presentation I'll be giving in a few days. So this is a fraction of it. And that was the summary. It's an update of the status of work done, where things are. There's been a number of critics on social media, which have been very useful for me in actually sort of developing counter pieces of work. There's 4. How big should the buffer for the management of wind and solar be? Yeah.
The presentation disappeared. You're not sharing anymore.
Not sharing. How?
Yeah.
How?
There. Okay. Now we see all the slides.
So what if I did it like that?
Because this is more reliable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, so all right. So keep going.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So there was 4 big complaints, or 4 big questions, like the wind and solar buffer for wind and solar are very intermittent, and the buffer for that is proving to be the primary question or the primary problem. I'll show you why that is. But how big should it be? Can pumped hydro deliver that storage? Can stored hydrogen deliver that needed buffer? And there's a new one that I keep hearing, my critics tend to actually fall back into a defensive position once each one has been defeated. And the latest one is, can a 3 times build out of wind and solar, plus a 6-hour buffer, plus a 90% reduction in the fleet of cars, as in they're all AI-driven cars, resolve the resource shortfall? And so I did some calculations for that. Then I did a sensitivity analysis, and then I get into some proposed solutions, degrowth and all that, what we might do. So, status of the work. So, unfortunately, the animations don't work here, but I've shown the targets I've picked are based on an IEA report, net zero by 2050, where everything that I'm actually sort of working on with these ideas has to happen by 2050, which is, 26 years and a few weeks away. So, is a map. Unfortunately, all this was animated, and it doesn't actually come up in the actual presentation. Anyway, you can see this on Friday. The base calculation now looks like this. I've been through peer review many times. I've been given a good flaming by lots and lots of people, and they've all requested me add things. And so the numbers have gotten progressively bigger. So now we've still got well, yeah, you haven't included this, and you must include that, otherwise you are doing something terrible. Right, so 1.4 billion vehicles travel 16 trillion kilometers. So now, to phase out fossil fuels on an annual basis, we need to charge the electric vehicle fleet, produce hydrogen as a direct fuel, produce steel in a hydrogen atmosphere, produce ammonia via hydrogen, which will go into the maritime shipping industry, among other things, phase out fossil fuel power generation, and we're going to heat buildings with heat pumps. Fifth generation heat pumps. Mm-hmm. Now, what's also a change since last time, someone had a good spit and dribble at me that I didn't include biofuels. Mm-hmm. Right, so biofuels are now included. Well, they were included before, but they weren't included in the main calculation. So, according to the IEA, 37% of the maritime shipping industry will be biofuel. And the aviation industry will contract by 38%, and then what's remainder of that will be biofuels. And
I'm just wondering if, so with your biofuel calculations, are you also including the agriculture impacts of producing that many biofuels?
Nope, this is straight delivery to the market. So in other words, my numbers are too small and they're not ugly enough.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Right, so it's as simple as that. So to do that, we need 940 million tons of biofeed mass. And then on top of that, you've got the agricultural impact and the nutrient flows and the pollution and all that. Now, put this in context, the wheat crop of the same year was 402 million tons. So to do that, right, yeah.
No food for humans.
So, well, this is the conflict that's coming. And the simple answer is we just shut down a lot of our transport fleet. Anyway, you sum all that together, we now have, in addition to what we have now, 48,909 terawatt hours of annual capacity to generate power. That is now what's required. So, and the new table of power stations is this. We need 796,210 new power stations. Now, to put this in context, there was only 46,000 423 power stations in 2018. And so this is more than 10 times. We're going to install power of 29.9 gigawatts of power. And so here is, I think, things that this whole idea of the buffer, wind and solar are variable. What do we need? And so instead of actually trying to argue the toss with people, what I've done is actually done a calculation, 4 calculations across the whole spectrum. Each one's backed by reference. The establishment believes they only need 6 hours or 5 to 7 hours.
Yes.
And the real number is probably 12 weeks. And the reason they get that 12 weeks is they actually looked at if you had like a number of slow wind days, wind lulls, but you had them in a whole string of them, and then you had to give the grid time to recover, and they reckon 12 weeks at a minimum was needed for that. And then you've got the solar issues associated with how much solar between winter and summer. So 12 weeks is probably the real number. I've been using most of my numbers so far in 28 days, thinking it's more conservative. Right, but that turns out has upset quite a few people. So anyway, we've now got all 4 sets of calculations in each one. Now, where's the metal going? So this is the base case with the 28-day buffer. So if we go back to here, if 12 weeks is the real answer, but I'm using 28 days, right? Okay. So these numbers are just not big enough.
Mm-hmm.
This is where it's all going. Now, the big red slice there is the metal content. This is for copper. The metal content going into stationary power storage to maintain the buffer.
Oh, I see. That's 96%.
Yeah. So the buffer becomes the question. Right. Like, how do we actually buffer wind and solar so it's actually smooth sinusoidal power all of the time when it is now the primary energy source going into the grid? So if we can't resolve that, then wind and solar are not viable, right? And if they're not viable, what are we going to do? So what's Plan B?
So I know one of the alternative scenarios where like triple the production so that you can reduce the buffer.
That's scenario N. That's triple the production of wind and solar.
Yeah.
That's actually the numbers I'm about to show you. This is the baseline so far. So here is the if we were to reduce the global mining industry in 2019, that's that column there. But then each column after that is each of the scenarios assuming a different buffer. Anything more than 27 years is colored in red. So even at the 6-hour buffer, we've got multiple metals that are in serious trouble. Then the mining industry is not going to be able to deliver in its current form. Right, and so here is the numbers graphically. That's a log scale. Right. Yep. And so let's open some more mines now. Let's fall in our resources. So here's our mineral reserves. A mineral reserve is something associated with a feasibility study, whereas a mineral resource is a patch of ground that has a higher rate of mineralization than background, and we think there's something there, but we're not sure what. It also includes things that are not beyond our technological reach and things that are simply not economically viable. But we've included all of it. So these are the reserves. So you've got the 4 colors. Pink is the 6 hours, but the real number is probably between red and blue, between 28 days and 12 weeks. And the hatched line is our reserves as of 2022. Not even close across all of these metals. So let's add resources. Mineral reserves plus known mineral resources on land. Still not good enough. And that brings us to the dumbest idea I've heard in a very long time. That's mine the sea floor.
Oh, right. Yeah.
You imagine mining several thousand tons a day per operation off the sea floor, the sediment plume that would actually sort of come off that, and what that would do to what's left of the life in the oceans. But let's add it. The mineral reserves that we know of, resources, that we know of under the sea is this, added to reserves on resources on the ground, on land, and mineral reserves. So that's everything that we know of in the planet Earth system versus what we need for the first generation of stuff.
Wow. Yeah.
And to make the point, this is the same data as before, but that's a log scale, so you can all fit it onto one graph. A linear scale is that. It's the same data. So here we've got, the black is the stuff under the sea, the white is resources on land, and the grey is reported global reserves. And the blue, it's between the red and the blue, but I personally think it's the blue, is what's required to actually produce enough stuff to stand still. This is not even a Red Queen problem.
Right.
And
so this is just to have as much as we have now, but it still wouldn't allow for economic growth, which keeps our debt economy running.
It's worse. It's how things were 5 years ago.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And that brings us to this slide. Hang on. Here we go. When the fail is so strong, one face palm is not enough.
Yeah.
How do we get here? We've been using ideology to solve our problems without checking the numbers against reality for 50 years, and we've been doing this on multiple fronts. So, and this is, if you saw the animations, this is solar radiance in Germany. I've shown this slide before on other YouTube, so I'll probably skip past it. No wasting anyone's time.
Yeah.
This is a study that was done by the US Department of Energy. After looking at my work, they did an internal audit of one of their own systems, 100 million people across a 12-month period. And they found, basically, I was correct that wind and solar really did underperform for about 6 months of the year, and it did it at the worst possible time. The winter is when we need to have a lot of power for heating of buildings, and that's when it was poor. So conceptually, six hours isn't going to do it. So that brings us to, well, can we get the power buffer from somewhere else? Like pump storage, pumped hydro storage is how we do it now. Now, for listeners, we've got a hydroelectric power generation system on a river, and then you've got at an elevated portion a reservoir of water water can be pumped in and out of. And at night off peak, water is pumped up to the reservoir, and during peak production, the water then comes back down the hill to generate electrical power. And so it's a way of storing energy. It has a round trip of about 80%. So the Australian National University found 530,000 potential sites around the world that could be used for pumped hydro. You might notice there's very few in Northern Europe.
Yeah, none in Finland or Sweden, or the Baltic states.
Yeah. So, in fact, it's only in areas where the sun shines okay. So.
Oh, okay.
But if they were to do this, they would have to actually sort of rezone a vast amount of land that's heavily developed at the moment, and that is considered politically unacceptable. But let's say we forced the issue and did it. The question then became, how much water would that actually tie up? You might notice very few of them are at the coast, so almost all of them would be using fresh water of some sort. Now, we use fresh water already, but how much? So if we take the 28-day buffer, which is too small, we need to deliver about 2,192 terawatt hours a year to the grid. So if water flows, say 100 cubic meters of water flows through a turbine, operating at 90% efficiency with a head of 570 meters, like a drop, how high? You get a 500 megawatt system or thereabouts. So 500 megawatt hours would then need 360,000 cubic meters of water. Assuming 80% efficiency, right, and everything, we would need for that buffer every year 1,949 cubic kilometers of fresh water. Now, here's where it gets ugly. The global annual freshwater withdrawal in 2018 was about 3,990 cubic kilometers. Now, to show this graphically, looks like that. So 2018 is there. That's how much water we pulled out of the natural hydrological system. Agriculture took most of it, which is normal. These are the four buffers.
So that's above?
Up on top of, yeah.
On top of, okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this is the extra amount of water that we would have to withdraw from what we're already taking.
But this would be all of the water used for the hydro pump, or just that little bit extra would be used for the hydro pump?
So the hydro pump is the pink.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So this is what we're taking now in the left-hand column. The pink is the extra stuff that we would need.
Oh, okay.
If we would do it. Right. And so 28 days is this here. So we need half again.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And so, or if 12 weeks, it's this giant block of pink would have to sit on top of that. So we're up here somewhere. Now, the problem is we're drawing more fresh water than ever before out of the natural system with each passing year because our population's growing. So pumped hydro can't do it. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, we already have a lot of stressed aquifers.
Yeah. Like this is not going to work. Certainly not for 8 billion people. Mm-hmm. Right. That brings us to hydrogen. So I'm hearing a lot about hydrogen. So we make hydrogen and store it. Now, and back to here, if you are actually storing power in these reservoirs, with hydrogen is the same problem. You've got to store the power in one place, but then you've got to deliver it to a place where it's needed. Right, and they're always different. And how do we transfer that power? And that in its own right is a can of worms.
Oh, I just had a question about the hydro pump storage in terms of that I'm sure some people would ask. Is because the water doesn't get completely used up, it gets re-released afterwards. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, it's not tied up indefinitely, but I know certainly some will be lost through evaporation and things like that.
But if you're drinking it or using it, it's no longer stored.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, when it's in the pump hydro, it's stored and then it can be reused by the others. But you're like obviously
to reuse that's a one pass through the system. If you were to reuse that, then you've got to somehow store such a large amount of water in two places, where it goes from one place to another and back again.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And the infrastructure would be, I mean, it would take decades to build this amount of infrastructure
So
anyways.
what you could do is force the situation and use seawater, have such reservoirs close to the sea, and pump it in and out of the sea. That might work, but finding such places geographically, close to the coast, you could do it for a small number of sites, but I'd be very surprised if you could do it that many to be useful.
I've also talked to hydro pumped storage people, and they say some of the big issues is that if they pump it quickly, then it kills the wildlife. And if they pump it slowly, then it gets the intake valves get covered in mollusks and all kinds of things.
So and so you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. These problems are complicated, and we're so used to fixing things in isolation because the solutions are always small. But now we've got these massive solutions. We've got to start thinking in systems. When you put a massive solution on the ground, it impacts everything. So anyway, so that brings us to hydrogen.
Oh, someone doesn't like to be harassed.
No, over booty.
Booty.
No. I think we should rotate the mattress
Why?
so that you're sleeping.
We can hear somebody on there.
Okay, I managed to mute them. Okay.
Okay, good.
Ahead.
All right.
Yeah.
So as we were, right, hydrogen. So now let's say we're going to deliver this power with hydrogen. The general idea is when we have excess power, make the hydrogen, store it. Right. Now, it's fine and good for a small amount, but when you want to scale it up to these big things, that's when the trouble starts. So hydrogen takes about 15 kilowatt hours, a kilogram, to produce with electrolysis. We're not allowed to use gas anymore. Right, but once you actually once we've got a kilogram of hydrogen, it produces 15 kilowatt hours. Right, but to produce it, you need 50 kilowatt hours. And that's conservative. The real numbers, when I did the study, it was 55. I think it might be down to 52 now. But I was been using 50 kilowatt hours a day to be more conservative and have the study last for longer. You also got to spend about 2.5 kilowatt hours a kilogram to compress that hydrogen into 700 bar tanks, like pressurized tanks. Now, we've got a 28% round trip efficiency. The technology to produce, store, and transport such a large volume of hydrogen doesn't exist yet, because it's an absolute bugger to store. It leaks through everything. It tends to it makes everything brittle. It's flammable. There's all sorts of problems. We can store hydrogen just fine on a small scale, but not at that level. Okay, so this table shows the 4 different buffer levels. This is the column that we need, the amount of power that we would need to deliver back to the grid over 1 year if that buffer was to be useful. 6 hours down to 12 weeks. So assuming that we've gone through the sequence up here, like this is how much we need, on top of the 48,909 terawatt hours, we would need to expand the power grid to make the hydrogen, right? And that expansion is substantial. At 28 days, we're talking about a 27% increase on top of that 48,000 and 81% increase on top of that 48,000 for 12 weeks. So it's not going to happen. That is practically ridiculous. Also, considering wind and solar are also part of that 76% of the global mix, we've now got a portion of that power which will need further support. Further support.
Oh, okay. I'm seeing. So basically, to do the hydrogen storage, we'd need to produce 27% more
power.
Okay.
Between 27 and 81% more power on top of what we're doing.
Yeah.
With the base case scenario.
And we'd have to do it all without fossil fuels.
Without fossil fuels.
Yeah.
That's where the trouble starts.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So pumped hydro is not going to be practical, but neither will hydrogen. And my work is showing battery banks are not practical either. But that's what our global policymakers think is going to happen. Right. So that brings us to scenario N. This is a 3 times build out of wind and solar, and a 6-hour buffer to manage the day-to-day intermittency, which will have to be a battery bank, but also the idea that we're going to go to automated cars, AI-driven robot cars, and we all share, right? And now, so instead of when you have a car, most of the time it's well, buses are running flat out. Already. This is the passenger car fleet. When you own a personal car, it sits in the garage 90% of the time, right? So the idea is to, instead of doing that, we share. And so it's a great idea, but will it work? So the scenario was this: the passenger fleet car is cut back to 10%, but the same number of kilometers are driven. So 1/10 of the cars will now do 10 times the work. Yeah. So we've got the same number of kilometers, which means we need the same amount of battery charging. But what it means is our batteries will last 1/10 of the time and need changing out faster. Right? Heavy trucks, buses, rail, and maritime shipping are unchanged because they're already running flat out. It's getting to the point where you can't really do much more with them anyway. Like any commercial vans or light trucks, they're also running flat out because there's an economic optimization. They've got to pay for the capex that it costs to buy them in the first place, right? And so unless you start running night shifts on some of these things, they already are for a lot of them, right? So it's the idea that you can't really sort of cut them back. What you can cut back on is the passenger car fleet. There is 3 times build out of wind and solar on top. So I've taken my existing numbers and multiplied them by 3. And so the idea is when things are low in production, we're having more power coming in. And that is going to be enough to overrun these losses. The power needs outside the transport fleet are the same. Okay, so this is what it ends up looking like. A 3 times overbuild. I laughed when I put these together. We will need 2,172,882 new power stations of average size.
Wow. And this is within 10 to 15 years?
Well, we've got to have it operational and done within 27 years.
Okay.
Ho, ho, ho. So at the moment, we've got 26. In 2018, we generated and consumed 26,652 terawatts. We've got between 5 and 6 times that power generation capacity now has to be put on in place. Now, that's what this means when we're actually sort of multiplying. Yeah.
So how many power stations were built in like 2018 or the last year or something?
So I don't know about the number of power stations that were built, because they're constantly building new ones and decommissioning old ones. There's this treadmill of it's not happening fast enough. Like most power stations past their decommissioning date because we're not keeping up with maintenance. I don't know the answer to that. And now that you think about it, I should probably go and find that. What I can say is in 2018, there was only 46,423 power stations. And the difference between those numbers is the effectiveness of coal and gas versus the effectiveness of wind and solar. Something else to consider is a wind and solar power plant array tends to be smaller in footprint and size than a coal-fired power station, which is like a really big industrial system. So there's a couple of differences in this, but the sheer numbers we're talking about here are huge.
Yeah, I just did a quick calculation, and we need to produce an extra 74,000 average power stations a year for 27 years. Yep. That's more than what we have now.
Yeah, like yeah. We can't even do free healthcare.
Yeah,
I mean, come on, guys. So yeah, all right. So here are the metals. That's the amount of metal that we would need to do that scenario. That's global metal production in 2019. This is the number of years that we would need to hit that. Right. So anything over 27 years is in red. So even with this scenario, the mining industry is not in a state to actually deliver and would have to expand. It would have to expand greatly.
Yeah, I see 32,000 years to produce germanium.
So some intellectual muppet, intellectual midget, sorry, dreamed up solid-state batteries will take over. Now, there are 3 solid-state chemistries which I use. One of them has germanium in them.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and it might work on a small scale, but we're I think it's 130 tons a year of germanium is what we produce, but we need 4.16 million tons just for the first generation of stuff. Right, so for that to go to that, we need 32,000 years. As I said, a lot of these things are trace elements. Look at all the rare earths. A lot of things are trace elements. Right, and we mine them and use them in very, very small quantities. But now we want to mine them like copper and steel. And the mineralogy doesn't allow for that. So anyway, so that's our mining industry's ability to produce. Then we'll go to, well, let's look at reserves. Let's just open some more mines up. She'll be fine. Fine. The reason I like looking at reserves is it takes about 10 to 15 years to go from a reserve with a feasibility study to a producing mine. And it takes about 7 or 8 years to go from a resource discovery to a feasibility style reserve. So we're talking about 20 years for a single mine. And for every 1,000 mines, every 1,000 deposits discovered, only 1 or 2 become mines. Mm-hmm. So this is a big problem. So reserves, if we need to get this done in the next 22 years, 27 years, or 26 years in 4 weeks, which is, then resources aren't going to do it. We have to fall back on our reserves. And do we even have the capacity to expand to those reserves? The answer is no. So, but let's look at those reserves. This is with this scenario N. Anything that's less than 100% is flagged as red. So copper is okay, but that doesn't account for any other copper that we might demand. And once again, these numbers, I haven't included anything in infrastructure, right? And any of the conventional demands. It's just not there. And there are shortfalls in the copper industry now. So our reserves are not enough to hit the target.
Oh yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. So this doesn't include like housing or any other kind of
none of that. Yeah. None of the conventional stuff. This is the let's make some electric vehicles and solar panels.
So then there would be also no production of like refrigerators or like this doesn't include any of that.
No.
Consumer. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So all right. So will it work? So okay, let's say we hit that target. Will it work? If you assume you simply produce during the day for sun, and what you need for the entire day, then you have to look at the natural capacity factor. Natural capacity factor for solar, average worldwide, is between 11 and 13%, and the best parts of the world, like California, are 25. Wind is between 20 and 24, and the best parts are up to 50 on the sea. Low parts, like Indonesia, are at 10%. So then, assuming you're 100% efficient, moving power from day to night, which, good luck with that, then you've got an average of 4 times overbuild globally. And for solar in Germany, it's actually 9 times. And for the best wind farms in Germany, 2 times. Then you have to assume that what storage medium is used and how much loss might be involved during moving power from day to night. If you use hydrogen, which is 28% round trip, 65 to 80% is lost. So you have to multiply your overbuild by 3 to 5 times. Right? If battery banks are used, which are not possible now for long duration, but maybe over a short term, maybe 20 to 40% of loss, so simply multiply by 1.5. So now we have an overbuild of 6 to 45. So let's be conservative and say 15 times. I had a discussion with a friend of mine called Lars Shenenko about all this. Right, so now we've then got to overcome seasonal weather. Like when I was living in Australia in Mount Tamborine, it would often rain. And there was one year in particular, I think it was 2013, it rained for 8 weeks.
Wow.
And we had solar panels on the roof. And for those 8 weeks, those solar panels didn't produce anything. So if we had 3 times the solar panels, we'd still get 0 for 8 weeks. Right. So let's say, is it 5, 10, 20, 90 days? So let's say, if it's 10 days, 10 times 15 is 150 times. And for 60 days, it becomes 60 by 15, which is 900 times. Right? And none of this helps.
900. So 900 times
The base case.
Oh, wow.
but none of it helped.
How much energy needs to be produced?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But remembering it's only available. A lot of this stuff's offline for most of the time, and that's the problem. But when it's offline, having another system next to it, does that help?
Right. It doesn't.
Right. And also when you've got problems regionally, like low sun hours are usually low because it's winter, which is the case for the entire northern hemisphere. Right. And when you actually have like like really, really bad weather, you have like a big rain system, big low pressure system. That's not local. That's over a whole region.
Mm-hmm.
And that whole region doesn't produce power for that reason.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh.
3 times 0 is still 0.
I just wanted to add, because I know I get this from far fantasy people about a global electrical network, and where they would load balance across the whole globe, and it's just completely unrealistic because of transmission losses and politics, to my understanding.
So there's a project that's pumping solar power from Western Australia to Singapore, and I forget the name of it, but there's a cable that they're looking at. They're having terrible problems with the power losses in that cable under the sea.
Mm-hmm.
And they're much more substantial than they thought they would. And the project is I believe, failing.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
So it's the problem.
Yeah. I heard even with DC, which has lower power losses, it's still too much.
Yeah. So will it work? Probably not. Okay. So that brings us to the sensitivity scenario. So. Oop, you froze. You still there? Yeah, you're good. Right. So what I've done here is I've got a massive Excel spreadsheet with 700 or 800 tables, and they're all linked. And what I would do is I would do one change and then calculate the end. And things like the things looked at were what if electric vehicles, the fleet was reduced by 50% in size or 90%? Or what if Class 8 trucks weren't hydrogen, but they were electric vehicles as well? What if we increased buses by 300%? What if trucks were reduced by 50%, and so on? And so every single big parameter that was used in my study was changed somehow to see how it moved from the baseline. Steel production. So if we want to rebuild the entire system, we are talking about a massive amount of new steel and cement. Right, we're going to retool everything. So we are looking at increases of 200% and 300%.
In order to make the infrastructure for the renewables?
If we're going to rip up the entire internal combustion petroleum society network and reorder society around a new technology, right, we're talking about a massive restructuring of society. Massive. And so what would that look like? The black is the most interesting. Is if we reduced conventional electricity demand and became more efficient, or if we increased it, say if our population grew and we increased it and we had like 3 times the population, or 3 times the electrical power demand. And the column on the right is about the quantity of metal. What happens if solar panels became twice as effective in operating hours, and wind turbines became twice as effective? Like not just a tiny step chain of a few percent here and there. You know, a 200% increase, what would happen? If the entire energy mix was 50% solar, 50% wind, what would happen? Right. And then if we looked at if we increased in nuclear, like if we introduced more nuclear into the mix, what would happen? Then there was 80% of all batteries in our LFP, or 50% of batteries are now all a solid state. And then scenario mu, which I'm hoping we have time for, is a savage degrowth scenario.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that sounds really interesting.
I talked to the Club of Rome guys. And so...
go ahead. Tell us, what did they say?
So, well, they want me to... I'm actually going to merge my work with a couple of other people, and we're going to write some documents for the Club of Rome, and that'll be the new flagship. You know, and that's what we're planning to do. So they're very interested in this. So here is the actual results. Because the animations don't work, I haven't really... I've just brought them here. So A to E is so A to E is what if we change the electric vehicle fleet? And E is if we increase the buses by 300%. So here's our baseline, 0. That's 448,909 terawatts. Plus 20% is 58,961. And minus 20% is 39,000, which is still huge. Huge!
Mhm.
All right, so F and G are trucks. So F and G, like if we reduce 50% the entire trucking fleet, it drops a bit. But if we increased it by 200%, it shoots up to there. So it has a big increase.
Okay, and this is the percent change of energy
baseline.
requirements.
And this is the percent change in the amount of power that would be required.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right, how much total power, and that tells us how many solar panels. The next slide is metals. Right, so now we're going to the maritime shipping, I, J, and K. So where's it? I, J, and K, that's in there. So if we actually reduce the shipping industry, it doesn't make much difference. Like 10%, 50%, and 90% reduced.
Right.
So that is a reduction of 90% of the maritime shipping industry, like, moving stuff around the world, and where such a lot of fossil fuels is used in that. What would it change? The big one is steel. So if we reduce steel by 50%, or reduce it by 90%, or increase by 200, or increase by 300. So, and that is what? L to O. So L to O. So these are the reductions. Yes, we get a big result, but when we increase, it shoots up.
Yeah.
It's massive increases. And so this is ammonia. If we produce less ammonia or we increased it, that is what? P to R. So P to R, bugger all difference. So, and T to W is what happens if we actually got changed our electrical power demand. And so T to W. So these are reductions.
Yep. And
this is an increase in like 200% and 300%.
So the reductions seem to make the U scenario seems to make the best results.
So in other words, we take what's U?
U is conventional reduced by 90%.
Demand by 90%. Right. So we take all that. So we want to move into a non-fossil fuel world now, and we think we're going to use electrical power to do it. Reduce existing demand to actually take and make way for new kinds of demands. So these are the kinds of savage things to actually sort of look at. So that, and then that brings us to this series here, alpha, beta, gamma out to mu. And let me just bring that to the forward. It looks like that. So alpha, beta are solar and wind. Alpha is solar panels became 200% more effective, or wind turbines became 200% more effective. Difference so small, it's hard, you can't really see it on the graph.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
Because this is their availability problems. Gamma, if the energy mix was altered to 50% solar to 50% wind, it shoots up here. So this is the amount of metal needed.
Oh, this increases the amount of metal. Okay.
Yeah. Right. So, and these three are what happens if we actually take away the solar wind mix and we send it to nuclear. So we've got 7.5% in the scenario anyway, but if we go to 10, that's delta, 20 is epsilon, and 30 is zeta, right? So epsilon, delta, epsilon, zeta. If the energy mix was altered to nuclear power, increased to 30%, reducing wind and solar. So that's actually our biggest,
I'm wondering if by nuclear, you're talking uranium or thorium.
This is standard uranium at the moment.
Okay.
The standard system. The thorium stuff that I like to talk about, that's actually, we're not allowed to say it out loud. So now we're actually talking about the classic uranium. This is your problem now.
Oh, okay.
So that's what I'm saying. When I talk to politicians, that's how I talk to them. This is what you signed up for. You've got to deliver this. Good luck with that. So this is uranium. And this is your conventional uranium systems that take 30 years to build.
Right.
So theta, and so eta, the last two are batteries. Like say if 80% of the market became LFP batteries, then we've got this one here. So we have a reduction in some things, but other things go through the roof. And theta
Wow.
is solid state, which is 50% of all batteries are now solid state. It makes no difference
change.
at all. And that brings us to mu, scenario mu. This is the degrowth scenario, and this is what I put together.
Mhm.
Right. Now we're turning nasty. The scenario is as follows. All heavy trucks are reduced by 50%. Rail transport is increased by 300. Buses are increased by 300. Commercial vans and light trucks reduced by 40%. Passenger cars reduced by 70%. Motorcycles are reduced by 70. Maritime shipping is reduced by 60. Steel production is increased by 300 because we've got to build a new system. Conventional electrical power is reduced by 50%. Nuclear now accounts for 20% of the energy generation mix. Now, that is a savage degrowth. That is not something that is even remotely political palatable, but that is a reduction of the human footprint. But what we end up with is about 15% reduction from the baseline.
Wow.
So we went through it. So how? What the hell's happening? We've reduced everything. Surely that make a difference. Here's what's happened. Right, this is where the metal's gone for copper. So we've a slightly more power required because we've got an increase of steel production, an increase of rail and all that, but the reduction of everything else. The vast majority of it, this is assuming a 28-day buffer, which is too small. The vast majority of it goes into this damn buffer for wind and solar, which means wind and solar are not the energy for us to use. We can't use them. If we didn't use wind and solar, then we wouldn't need that massive buffer. Right, but if you take wind and solar off the table and we're not allowed to use fossil fuels, what do we use? Asking for a friend.
Right. Well. So we're not allowed to talk about thorium.
Well, I'm talking about thorium, but this is this is what I like to talk about. This is the slide I like to show, and this generally gets good results. But it's also true. So what do we do? Existing system is snoogered. The planned green transition will not work in its current form, but we will have to attempt the same problems because we must. Circular economy and steady state economy are concepts that neither evolves, the only ones that can. So we need to actually build a new system with an unprecedented demand of resources of all kinds. And as one of the guys I like to read, Richard Heinberg, it's the project of the century. Hello, Richard, if you're seeing this. A plan for a radical reduction of consumption of natural resources is required once the system's established. We've got to build it first, and then we can. So that new system requires a new relationship between us and everything else. And so what do? Restructure society to operate to a different energy generation system using unorthodox technology produced from resources extracted in a different business model to what happens now. And you can have the rest of the day off and have a nice lie down. Right. So that's now that picture there, I actually took that at a place called Rainbow Beach, the Blow. I was walking along and I turned back and they were my footprints, but because the wind's blowing all the time, those footprints will be gone in 10 minutes. And so
Wow.
it's a cool place. So I took a picture of it. And what I'm trying to say here is I didn't come here to fit into your world. I came to make my own. I am surrounded by tribes and they've all got something to whinge about. And they've all got their hobby horses and no one's putting solutions together. But also no one wants to talk to anyone else. It's not a debate. It's actually a domination. I'm right and you're wrong. There's no discussion amongst ourselves in a collaborative fashion. Like the ancient Greeks saw a debate as something to everyone learn something, whereas now a debate is indoctrination and a trial by fire of which ideas can kill off all other ideas. And that's dumb. And so what I'm sort of saying is there are solution vectors, but it requires people to collaborate and come together and actually have a genuine conversation about what to do and then move forward.
So which solution vectors do you find the most promising?
Okay, well, I've presented this. This is like a quick solution set.
Okay.
This is how society can reorganize itself. I presented this before, So in the interest of not wasting other people's time. But here's the thing. Make batteries out of something else other than lithium, something preferably that doesn't catch fire. Lithium commercial batteries, this is like theoretical volumetric density and theoretical gravimetrical energy density, right? And in theory, when you actually look at the atomic combinations of the chemistry involved, lithium commercial batteries are down here. And they're actually, the stuff on the market is smaller again. This is the theoretical limit. Making batteries out of sodium is there, but the one I like is fluoride. So this is the fluoride in your toothpaste. Right, you could actually make batteries out of stuff that doesn't have resource complications like lithium. But do you know, I am still in research programs that look at battery chemistry, and the industry is still hot for lithium, and that's all they'll talk about. They said, oh, there's going to be lithium batteries for the next 3 to 5 years anyway, so we'll fund research on that. Leave us alone. And so...
So am I understanding this correctly, that kind of the higher it is to the top left, the more energy?
The top right.
Top right.
You've got the higher energy density.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so lithium ion are actually fairly low energy density.
Well, compared to what's out there, like lead's even worse. Lead's all the way down here.
Oh, I see.
Right. These are theoretical stuff that haven't really been talked about yet, like magnesium ion batteries. I mean, come on, guys. There's magnesium in seawater.
There is.
So the solution set's going to go something like this. Okay, this is a base case of how much extra power we need. And then we get to the quantity of metals. Do we actually really need all this stuff, or can we actually do something else? Like, do we need to have society structured the same way? But when we get to the metal shortfall, we're out of time and we're out of money. It's upon us now. There's shortfalls in the copper industry now, and nickel and cobalt now, and they're going to stay there till at least 2025. Right. So there's a lot of talk about how we're going to expand the mining industry, but the mining industry is actually facing some serious headwinds, and they're technical, and also raising capital. You've got to stop talking about stuff and actually get out there and do it. So that immediately leads to, well, if we have to go without, that means we have to degrow everything. Either we choose to do this, or it just happens, and we have to make the best of things. And then we go through rocket science questions like, should we make batteries out of something else? Or can we look at alternative technology? Instead of an electric vehicle, should we look at, like Toyota have just released, for example, an ammonia engine vehicle, which blows electric vehicles out of the water. Okay, but you've got to make the ammonia, which is from hydrogen. Right, so is it really a solution? And then you've got alternative systems. Do we need a car at all, or should we go back and do something else entirely different?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Look, I'm just wondering if, because based on my research, it seems there's just no way we will be able to feed people in metropolises or large cities.
Yep.
And people will basically have to move to rural areas and start growing their own food.
Yep.
And the best thing we can do for the transition is to have communication networks and transportation, like set up at least some kind of basic infrastructure for them to have these rural village communities like we had in pre-industrial times, but with some, high-tech benefits.
And all that. And so it's like, it's around the table. You've got all solutions and all problems are on the table at the same time. And you've got a combination of things. There's no one magic bullet, and we use everything a little bit differently. When people sort of say, oh, we can't do it for 8 billion people, the number of people who yell at me and don't like these ideas and refuse to acknowledge there's a problem at all, well, that's a problem solving of their own. Right, and so I'm just going to disappear over the horizon with a small group of like-minded people and make something work. Everyone else can stay here, and we'll see how things go.
So, are you saying that's the politicians, or?
So it's not just the politicians. Everyone I present my work to, everyone actually comes back and says, "Yeah, this is great. We just don't know what to do." but I also sort of see a lot of people in social media who point blank refuse to acknowledge any of this. Oh, human innovation will think of something.
Right. Yeah. I get it's denial.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
so when they say that, what they're really saying is, stop talking to me and stop telling me about this really challenging problem. You're making me upset.
Yeah.
Right, because human innovation will sort things out, provided you discuss the problem and meet it. Calling each other communist hippies and capitalist Nazis isn't going to help.
Yeah. I've been called both. So
all right. So we've misunderstood the commodities sector all this time, and we've got to, when we actually look at anything at all, you've actually got four. Let me actually clear this out for you. Okay, so when you've actually started looking at when we talk about minerals or energy, you've actually got four things together, and they're inseparable: energy, minerals, economics, and technology. You can't really have one without the other three in the world that's coming. And all of those things harvest information, natural resources from the planetary environment. And if we don't recognize that, then we don't have our hands on the system at all. So that's how we've been all this time. And any new system will have to have a similar structure, or we're done. Right. The bind we find ourselves in is the two pyramids. On the energy side, we had these massive high-grade oil deposits back in 1900 that was huge, and the oil was such high quality, you just catch it and put it straight in your car. And now we're down to Canadian tar sands, which require a lot of infrastructure and a very sort of poor energy return. Right. On the other hand, we've got our mineral deposits, which started out really small but very high grade. Right. And now we're down to these really massive low grade deposits that require a lot of energy to get. Right. So we've actually got to do two things. We've got to replace our energy sector with something high density. We are not going to be mining with solar panels and wind turbines. Something else has to happen.
Yeah.
But also where we get our raw materials has to be replaced somehow. We have to do something else. So that brings us to this little beastie. And so this is thorium, liquid fuel fission. And there's a number of options here. It could be liquid metal. It could be a salt with uranium, or a salt with thorium. I like a salt with thorium because the logistics of handling both the front end and the back end is actually much, much better. It's a much lower profile. Within the nuclear community, there's different tribes, and they're not interested in talking to each other.
That's unfortunate.
That's hilarious. It's friggin' hilarious. Anyway, so you've got a system where there's now a system in China, which I'm about to show you a picture of now. It's operating now, and it's selling power commercially, and it doesn't need water to cool. Wow. You take thorium salt, which can be made in any rare earth element mine site. Actually, I've got on the next slide, I've got the fuel cycle. Anyway, so here's what it does. You put the thorium salt into the actual reactor. You bombard it with neutrons to the point where thorium transmutes to uranium in decay by adding neutrons to it, and it becomes very hot, and it melts the salt. The salt becomes a liquid. The liquid passes around the circuit, and as it does, heat is exchanged between that and another fluid, which then goes on to generate heat by making steam and turning a turbine. Right, so that's it. And you don't need water to cool it down. Or actually bring it back. You don't need water to cool it down. There's a concept of Doppler broadening, which means if the reaction gets to a certain point, the reaction overruns itself and collapses. And if the reactor gets too hot, it will melt this plug, and the fuel will just drain out into these tanks and then cool down and be away from everything. So it's a very different proposition to conventional nuclear. So this is in status report 1972, where it's the end of a really, really, really big research program. They proved it worked. They actually had a system in Oak Ridge, was about 8 megawatts or 7 megawatts. It ran for 6,000 hours without a problem. right? And they then wrote this report to do a scale up of a 1,000 megawatt system, like a full size system. And they said this will work. We've been doing this for decades now. The Chinese have already got, this is like a little 2 megawatt system. That looks like it'll fit into a shipping container.
Yeah.
So that's actually selling commercially power now.
And I don't know if you heard that in Copenhagen, I believe
Yes, Copenhagen Atomics. I talked to those guys.
Mm-hmm.
They are also producing stuff, and they are have got a reactor that's going to be producing power by 2025.
Oh,
so,
well.
so this is, and they've got 2 pilots. So this is not a theory. People are, it won't work. It can't, blah, 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 can't possible. Right. Let's look at some footprint stuff. So this is the footprint. The bottom is conventional uranium. So we want to produce 10,000 gigawatt hours of power across 1 year. You start out with 123 million tons of uranium ore, and you make 278 tons of yellow cake. You then go through conversion and enrichment, where you're enriching the isotope of U-235 to about 4%, because it starts in natural uranium at 0.7%. Right. So you end up with about 32 tons of nuclear fuel, uranium dioxide fuel assemblies. You put that in the reactor, you make your power, and then you've got to take it out when the fuel is no longer sustaining the reaction. Most of it, 96% or 95 point something percent, is uranium-238, which is not useful. It's radioactive and it's very hot. And it comes out about 31 tons. Now, not all of that has to go, some have been classified. 19 tons has to be stored for 100,000 years. 347 tons is 3,000 years. So we're talking about a substantial amount. So that's after 1 year in a single reactor. To hit the same target with thorium, you do this. You go to a rare earth element mine, or there's a beach in India that just has monazite sand, right? And you dig up 280 tons of it. So 123 million tons goes to 280 tons. It's already smaller, right?
Oh, okay.
And then you make out of that, you refine out of that 1.45 tons of thorium dioxide. From that, you make a thorium salt. Now, the thorium salt is what's called fertile, not radioactive. So it's a little bit above background, a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's not radioactive enough to actually have a radioactive classification. Its hazard sheet says don't get it wet.
Oh, I see.
You keep it in a container, don't get it wet.
So if you had it in a glass container, you wouldn't.
Oh, a plastic container will do with a plastic lid.
Wow.
When I say keep it out of moisture, it dissolves.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got thorium in a liquid form because it's dissolved, and then it starts sedimenting out. It's a pain in the ass. You scoop that to the top of the reactor, and you generate power over 10,000 gigawatt hours over 1 year. What comes out the other end is about 50 to 60 kilograms, or about 4 to 5% is unburned because the isotopes just aren't suitable. The thing with a solid fuel, this is the difference between solid fuel and liquid fuel. A solid fuel is the stuff sits in a uranium, like uranium or thorium for that matter, is in solid balls, right? And the stuff on the surface irradiates out, but the stuff in the center is trapped. Now with thorium, you've got to take the rods out of the reactor while they're hot and radioactive, dip them in an acid bath to clean the surface, and put them back in.
Are you talking about uranium?
I'm talking about thorium.
Oh, thorium.
Solid fuel.
Thorium solid fuel. Okay, all right.
Uranium solid fuel is also the same, but there's no point in taking it out because it's such a low percentage of U-235.
Mm-hmm.
So uranium solid, thorium solid fuel, part of the way through the reaction, the stuff on the surface of the balls is now stopping anything from happening. Take it out, dip it in acid, put it back in, breathe a sigh of relief. This is why thorium solid fuel is not considered sensible.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Liquid fuel, it's a liquid passing around the circuit. Once it's in there, all parts of the fuel come in contact with all other parts of the fuel because it's a liquid.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is you could actually then put uranium in, but you could also put spent nuclear fuel in, and over time it will break down. So this is actually a... All right, so what also comes out of the thorium reactor is isotopes that are normally used in the medical isotope industry, like xenon, cesium, strontium, all that, iodine. And you can either pass it on and sell it, but if you don't want to do that, then you've got to store it, but you store it for 300 years, not 100,000. So the volumes are much less, you store it for less, it's not radioactive in the beginning, whereas conventional uranium is radioactive all the way through, and you need specialist training and equipment to do it. And also the uranium systems are vulnerable things to, to the Fukushima disaster, for example, and the, the Chernobyl disasters, and you have these big systems, and when they get away on you, there's nothing you can do about it. But the thorium systems will be much smaller, and there's other ways to manage them. And so these systems are so different that the thorium's almost not nuclear. Anyway, so this is actually already being done. So, yeah, anyway, so I'll stop there because, I don't want to chew up too much time.
Oh, okay.
Or I can keep going if you like.
Okay. Oh, well, yeah, that was really great. And I was actually thinking about the thorium, and I had come up with some like design plans for how we could do the transition like to a rural economy. And then my kind of idea was that like cities of 55,000 people-ish are possible to sustain based on pre-industrial models, with a rural catchment area with like horse and buggy or something very easy. And then they could have a thorium container size plant to do industrial activity, such as smelting or something like that.
So watch this. You could have a small thorium modular reactor under every large system, whether it's a hospital or a smelter or any industrial system. You could have one of these systems sitting under it. We could make the fuel easily because every country's got thorium. So you don't have scarcity of energy anymore. You don't have the transmission grid between things, but you don't have like a centralized big power plant with lots of transmission lines going out. So you don't need the infrastructure of the step up, step down transformers or the grid. And so everything's connected to a small localized grid, and there's less power used anyway. And we don't need the buffer, which means the vast amount of resources has just been wiped out in terms of what's needed by that one step.
And I'm wondering, do those nuclear submarines, do they use uranium or thorium?
Yeah, the uranium. Everything at the moment is uranium based.
Oh, okay.
Thorium is considered an experimental thing. Look, do you know, I looked into why this was knocked on the head and why we're not allowed to sort of, say this out loud without being flamed by the nuclear clerics.
Yeah.
And so what happened was when this was actually sort of shown in the early 70s, the politicians of the day were very worried about the Cold War. So the military were calling the shots. And the military said, stated two things. First, there's more money to be made out of a civilian uranium system. It's more jobs, more money. It's better around for everyone. And those people didn't care about issues like storage of spent nuclear fuel. And there certainly wasn't the perception of things going wrong, like an accident. And says, well, there's that issue. Then there's the issue, if we have a civilian uranium power nuclear fleet, we can camouflage the manufacture of nuclear weapons. If we go thorium, we cannot do that. So the decision was made, we want uranium, we don't want thorium. And ever since then, all discussions about thorium have been discouraged.
Well, I'm just thinking, like, now that we're in kind of this new situation, do you think that there will be an opening for this discussion? Because it seems to be the only way forward.
Copenhagen Atomic are operating, and the Chinese have actually gone out and done it, and they're giving the rest of the world the finger. So
yeah.
major forward upon us.
Yeah, based on my calculations, if we needed one for every 55,000 people, for 8 billion people, we'd need 145,000 thorium reactors.
So yeah, so now we've got the idea of well, do we actually need power in the same way and in the same factions? And so now we're actually talking about a different kind of society.
Yeah, but basically it seems like that we only really need that high density energy that we could only get from thorium or hydroelectric for industrial activity. And so, you know, I don't know how many industrial sectors an average country has, but right now we get most stuff from China. So
right, that's a problem.
Yeah. So if we had, like, say, every major continent or country had at least a few of these thorium manufacturing plants and industrial kind of new sustainable rural communities, then that could, even if the rest of the system will collapse just because it's unsustainable, we will at least have a seed of a new thing to spread out.
Yeah. So I'm working on the idea that we're too close to the problems where the wheels fall off, that there's not going to be a natural and a nice transformation. It's all going to go sideways on us, and it's going to be a big old mess, and a small part of humanity will be able to do something, but it won't get very far because the rest of us will have broken the system.
Right. So I had a few questions here. From someone mentioned sodium batteries, but I believe you were saying that it has it's a proprietary thing. And,
no. So let me get the sodium batteries are on the chart. What's interesting is when things actually sort of are talked about, we tend to go in tribes and stuff. Like we say the same things again and again and again. Sodium batteries are now finally being discussed. They've been around for years. But when I first arrived in Finland and was working in battery chemistry projects, it was battery, lithium, and cobalt. It was cobalt first, then lithium. Right, as you can see, sodium is the purple sodium ion, and they are indeed better than lithium ion in capacity. And they don't have, sodium is not a substance.
Scarce.
It's not scarce. But try to actually sort of get some information on the performance metrics, like what is in these batteries in terms of kilograms a megawatt of, say, sodium ion. Every battery system I've looked at needs copper, and it needs nickel, and it needs graphite. So what's in these ones? Because it won't be just sodium, it'll be other things as well. Then you've got this, well, how much energy does it put out? In terms of, like, if a sodium battery was in a bus, for example, how many kilowatt hours would it need to go 100 kilometers? And that's the kind of information I need to put it into my study. And at the moment, these batteries are so new that they're all commercial secrets. It says, oh yeah, they're batteries. The same thing with hydrogen fuel cells. They'll tell you roughly what's in them, but they won't tell you how much is in each one.
Yeah. And that makes it difficult to do a decentralized buildup everywhere. Yeah, because you don't know. And
I was this close, for example, for a hydrogen fuel cell, was to buy a hydrogen fuel cell and shred it and then send it off for assay.
Right.
To actually work out what's in it.
Wow. Yeah, that doesn't help with making them. So I had
you've got to quantify that. Is this a sensible thing to chase?
So I was wondering if we had people in our crowd. Did you guys have some questions? Otherwise, I got a list here from the Peak Oil group. Leon, did you want to say your question out loud? You've got on. No, you want...
Okay, so the basic idea is capitalism is repressing tech. That is true, but it's not capitalism as such. It is also geopolitical interests overrunning capitalism, because in that case it was the military. The United States military said, look, no, we want nuclear weapons and we want you to hide them for us.
But I'm thinking they have enough places to hide their nuclear weapons now.
Oh, it's also the production facility. When you produce a nuclear weapon, you've got to have reactors. You've got to make plutonium. You've got to refine it, enrich it, and there's a massive amount of infrastructure goes into making like one of these devices.
Mhm.
And then you can hide it amongst a civilian system and say, "Oh, that's just the civilian system."
Right, in the waste.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, I'm hoping that, since we have enough nuclear warheads to destroy the Earth like 500 times over, that maybe they have enough of those. We can start using it for energy now. So I had another question from here, Alan Kirk. If there is a strong interest in agroforestry systems, what resources are recommended? Has anyone read Compass Agroforestry? Yeah.
So what's the question? What resources should we be chasing?
So what resources, if we were to transition to agroforestry systems, what resources would we need? Like if we were to go to a rural, people growing food forests system.
So that circuit, the whole food production circuit and self-sufficiency and all that depends on tools. Whether it's tools, hand tools, or it's farm machinery. So it's what goes into farm machinery, assuming we can still run it with with whatever energy. And so now we're talking steel, copper, magnesium, tungsten, and all that. We've got to phase out plastics, and we've got to learn to make the stuff locally. So the biggest challenge in that, for example, would be to not so much sourcing resources, but working out how to, for example, make let's say an electric motor locally. So let's say in one city, one area, we're going to make an electric motor. We're going to source all the raw materials in, say, a 200-mile radius, 200-kilometer radius, whatever, right? And then we're going to refine it ourselves and smelt it ourselves and cast the parts ourselves and machine them up and wind the motors to make an electric motor. If we can do that, and it's something that's very, very simple. But if we can do that, it's all bets are off.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of, that system with the having those cities like of 55,000 people. Then you have enough specialization to make that possible. If you have the rural areas creating the agriculture, and in terms of the tools we would need, like trees don't need much. They don't need like tractors and stuff. So a lot of that can be manual labor. Like we would probably have a significant, probably somewhere between 80 to 95% of people living in the rural areas, and only 5 to 20% in the actual cities or suburbs, as we call them now. And the production that they would need, like things for processing nuts, and then that would be the only kind of agriculture, like mills and things like that. Those kinds of resources. There's a real, I don't know if you wanted to, if that helps at all.
So to me, what you're describing is it's a necessary evolution of the food sector. But to me, the technology sector will have to evolve in parallel to that, or we've got to let go of high density human populations, which is what you're suggesting anyway.
Yes.
But if we're trying to actually sort of maintain such a large population, we will need technology in some form. So the technology will have to evolve in a parallel stream to that.
Right. Yeah. And one of the things I was thinking is communication technologies, and like having a lot of radio towers or something like that, like internet and radio towers. That would be the main thing we would need in rural areas. I have a related question here from Philip Bogdanov. With there being 15 to 20 calories of fossil fuel supporting every calorie of food, what does net zero mean for agriculture? How do we wean our food system off petroleum and natural gas?
Well, the only answer for that at the moment is we go manual.
Right.
If we've got too many humans, well, the human being is a food source. Grow your own food. Here's a shovel.
Yeah.
And can I say something?
Go ahead, Ivor.
I talked to Elliot Coleman, and Elliot Coleman at one time, I called in and I said, well, this organic growing is not going to produce as much food as our industrial food system. And he said, no, it will produce as much food as our industrial food system. In fact, yields per acre can actually go up considerably. But, and this is a huge but, you need a lot more labor to make that happen. And you think about your little garden or something and how much you get out of a garden, which is a fantastic amount compared to, something next to it. But it takes a lot of effort and a lot of input. You have to keep very close an eye on where you get your inputs, like, manure or anything, any kind of nitrogen, etc. You have to find it and put it in there. So you have to put a lot more work in. But it can feed just as many people if they're willing to accept a rural lifestyle.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that I did research similar comments, and basically what it is it's per input. Per input, you can produce as much with organic or food forestry. But if you don't have, right now, our industrial system is producing way more than you could produce without inputs, because it's using inputs and it's using GMO crops that can really take those inputs and turn them into food, like 4 times higher yield than you could on average with an agroforestry or an organic system. Yeah. So anyway, Leon, you had something to add? I don't know if you figured out your microphone yet.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was just thinking about growing plants that create the nitrogen. More of that aside.
Yeah. So that would be in an agroforestry system. That's what you would do. Yeah.
In which case, the likes of permaculture, although it's been knocked to only be used on a small scale, but that clearly can be learned on a large scale and introduced to more people.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, for sure. And we do have enough, what do you call it? With an agroforestry system, you would have enough nitrogen and things like that.
Nitrogen fixers. You want nitrogen fixers, like
yes.
A lot of honey locust, a lot of those things are really good nitrogen fixers. That is going to be the shortfall is, we've been able to produce a lot of our, nitrogen through Haber-Bosch process. And, if we have less of that, then we're in trouble. But I mean, we're not really in trouble because, I don't know, I think you can live off of what is around. I mean, we had what you could call a food forest for over 20 years. And, we produced a lot of, food and, a lot of home heating fuel. And, we also sold a lot of wood to market too. So, it's definitely a doable thing for people, but it took a lot of work and a lot of management to take care of that forest. So.
Mm-hmm. And so I had a question here from Leon Mead regarding the population. I don't think it's a coincidence we grew exponential growth with oil production as we stare long and hard at the peak of oil. Can we start again correlate the decline of the two in relation to them being interwoven and dependent on each other, opposed to coincidences? So Simon's not here. I don't know if anyone else has a answer to that.
Well, we're going to have less people. I mean, I think, you might figure out a way to support people with some kind of industrial system or something. But I think right now we're looking at maybe less people in this century anyway. And I'm not being mean, and I don't believe in anybody making this happen, etc. But I think we're just going to have less people by the end of it all.
Oh, great. We got Simon back. It just cut out. I wasn't sure what happened there. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what MBS was saying about the oil supplies, I'd say like maybe 20 years or so, and we're going to see significant declines in how much energy we're getting from fossil fuels. And, you know, if you look at, we're getting 60 or so laborers per person worldwide. That's all going away. And I don't know, maybe we can make up for some of that with, as you're saying, thorium reactors. But then we're also stuck with this tribalism, right? That everybody is fighting against everybody else and claiming we can do this or we can do that. And it does seem like the biggest problem here is that tribalism.
Yeah, I've been working on that because I've made what do you call it? These things called blessed path. Here, I don't know if I can get it up to show you guys. But basically, the idea is that all the world religions, they have multiple paths in them, and at least one of them is on love and kindness and actually being nice to each other. And so I actually have bookmarks of these various blessed path documents, and I made them for kind of Islam and for Christianity and different things like that, and for Judaism and for Buddhism and for Hinduism, and how we can all work together, loving and being kind to one another. And that's to solve that tribalism issue that we're talking. I even made it for the indigenous people that are here locally in Ontario, where I live, the Anishinaabe. I'm right next to their Indigenous Friendship Center, and I had them had a look at it, and they really liked it. I had a parable and stuff. And you probably guys know about the Middle East conflict, and I made it for the Salafi Muslims, who are the most common type of Muslims that in ISIS, ISIL, Al Qaeda. So I gave them like a blessed path document here, and it basically explains how Islam is actually about peace, and it's about being kind, and it's not about those quotes that they're using to blow themselves up for Allah. That's a misinterpretation and a misunderstanding of the core values of Islam, and that in fact enter paradise in peace, enter my paradise in peace. And it actually, in the book of Muslim, it says that you can only enter paradise if you love and are kind to each other. And so that's very different than the image that we're being given by the narrative, if you will, which is still going that divide instead of the unified route.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of people are not getting that enter paradise in peace part, but in small pieces.
Yeah, well, they're not going to paradise that way, unless they're the victim. Then maybe.
Well, I just heard an interesting thing. I was listening to NPR, and they were talking about the Ottoman Empire, and toward the end of the Ottoman Empire, Ataturk, who was kind of took over, and he became kind of the they were kind of permissive of different groups. He decided he wanted to unite everybody into one Turkish state. So he forced everybody to become, he said, you have to change your names. You have to change your name to a Turkish name. He changed his. He basically said, and I think this is the common thing among a lot of empires and groups, we want you to all believe the same thing. And as that's, I think, one of the major things is empires will push people to believe in one ideology, one way of thinking. And I think especially lately, we're all being pushed into believing in, and it may not even be religious. It might be believing in the capitalist system or believing in the whatever.
The religion of progress.
Yeah, the religion of progress and the religion of, the idea that things are going to keep growing forever. And to not believe in that is kind of heresy. And I think that's what we're all coming up against. And to not believe in the possibility of, like Michael Dowd said, we just got to get right with it's all going down, and you can't there isn't much you can do about it. And I kind of, at first I rebelled against it, but now I kind of agree with him. It is kind of, it's a hard, different way of thinking, especially if your whole culture is thinking something else.
Mhm. I had another question here from Leon Mead. As we see America tighten their grip on the Middle East, will we see a speedier transition away from the petrodollar? I don't know if, Simon, you had any input on this.
By the way,
Yeah.
I just received this in the mail and I'm reading it.
Ubuntu. Oh, good. Yeah.
So, Middle East, that's an interesting one. I think the existing petrodollar system is based on a series of ideas that worked for the last 50 years, but work no longer. Right, especially the idea of the petrodollar, where all oil is purchased and sold in US dollars, making the entire world interact with the US dollar as the world reserve currency, even though it's fiat and they're printing money. I don't know if you remember, in 2009, they were trying very hard for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TTP, the TTIP, and the TISA. 3 big agreements between the governments of the world and corporations of the world and this was to be the replacement of the petrodollar. And this is the cardinal sin that Julian Assange is now cooling his heels in prison for, because he actually exposed this. They tried very hard to keep it quiet. The governments were kept out of it and the public were kept out of it. Right, but the corporations had full access, but it was supposed to be a replacement of the petrodollar. And he exposed it, and the European Parliament, members of the European Parliament got hold of it, and they realized this is not democratic. And so a few number of parliamentarians started to campaign against the idea, and it all came out and all collapsed. Right, and when it collapsed is actually the start of our current troubles. Geopolitically, since then, that's about the time we started seeing a civil war between different factions in what you might call the deep state. Is when that failed. Now, this idea of, well, if the Americans try to annex the Middle East, well, they're there now. They control everything there now. And if you ask the basic question, would a peaceful Middle East be in Americans' best interest? The answer is no, because the price of oil would go up and they would lose control. Right? And so let's say they do go in and they annex the Middle East. It's sort of like fighting over the scraps of oil that are left.
Yeah.
Right? The next system...
Scraping the barrel.
Yeah. The next system after that, whatever that is worth fighting over. For example, if electric vehicles were the thing, which it's now apparent that it's not, but let's say it was, then the Congo would be the next Middle East. And the Chinese control that area already.
Yeah.
Right. So to answer your question, would the Middle East see American military action? Probably, because if all you've got is a hammer, everything's got to look like a nail. They're going to have a go. They're going to give it a red hot go, but will it work? Probably not. And they just look like idiots.
And with how we're losing, the oil is declining in production. It seems like these large wars will be increasingly more difficult to do, because they've lost most of their NATO weapons in Ukraine already.
Yeah. Well, about a third of them have been handed off to the black market, or a large proportion of which winds up here in Finland. Great! You muppets! Right, and they can't afford to replace those weapons. So now we're in a situation where, on behalf of a country that's not European, not part of NATO, and really is quite corrupt, we've actually chewed up all, if not most, of our disposable small-scale stuff that we can hand on, and we don't have any money. The amount of money, for example, the UK would have to spend to actually send out a flotilla of ships, they can't afford. Right, so now we're at the point where how the hell are we going to stand up against the Russians and the Chinese when we can't even afford a small-scale action? And so this is the logistics that supports the stuff on the front line. That's where things break down. Our ability to pay for the fuel to fuel the ships.
And I just like to add that it's not just money that's printed. It has to be backed by something. And right now it's mostly backed by energy. And because we're running out of that energy, it doesn't matter how many dollars you print. It still represents, like, it's just every dollar represents less energy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's thinking in that, like, military doctrine's moved on several times now, but we're still thinking in terms of large carrier groups. Right. That's not how. Like, I read a good book recently on 5th generational warfare. Right. That's how warfare is done now. Multi-dimensional, all at the same time, and the West still is remembering its glory days. They don't realize that everything's changed.
But you have to remember that like the British at the end, they wanted to do the Suez.
Yeah.
And they just got cut off. That was like, no, you're not going to go, the British Empire, which was down, 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 down. They said, no, they cut you off, they cut them off. And they said, that's it. And I was thinking about it. I was thinking, here's the, the West. And there's going to come a point where I think the money people are going to cut us off of continuing to have a giant war, I mean, that's almost a hopeful scenario,
The war is a distraction. The war is needed as a distraction to distract people, the West in particular, from the state of a domestic situation. Whereas if they have a nice, good old-fashioned war, they can say, oh, the economy crashed because of the war. It was nothing to do with us. Those dastardly Russians, not our own incompetence or the choice we made 50 years ago.
Or the
By the way,
Ukrainians.
we're taking what's worth the money.
Or heaven forbid, we might lower our standard of living or do something a little different to make it through what was coming. I mean, I'm kind of amazed all the time. I have so many friends that are flying around constantly. I'm kind of amazed that they haven't cut that off because, jet fuel is very similar to diesel, which is what our new problem is going to be this next winter. It's going to be diesel in Europe. It's going to be diesel everywhere is our big problem. And it's sort of amazing to me that nobody has even suggested maybe like cut back a little, huh? I mean,
you don't have to cut back that much. Like when I was in America recently, apparently it's illegal in California to do your washing and hang it on a washing line. You've got to put it in a dryer.
Right.
What? In California?
California.
But it's so dry there. That's the best.
Well, someone I knew used to live in Sacramento, and he said if he could convince Californians, like especially I think it might have been an area that was particularly wealthy, and the residents didn't like seeing other people washing up in their backyard as they looked across the. It was something stupid like that. And I go, right, this is why aliens won't talk to us.
Well, I agree. I mean, there's a lot of things you could do, a lot of things that could be done, but a lot of people are not even thinking, even any kind of a reduction in their ability to fly around. I mean, this latest meeting, that one that you're showing right now, Andre, was very interesting because the European Union were discussing a possibility of diesel outages. And I like the conclusion of it was, I guess it isn't a problem.
Yeah, that's what they basically said.
That was the
like, we have 90 days of reserves, we'll be fine.
It's fine, don't
Yeah.
The best analyst on diesel I've seen is Art Berman, and he shows how total liquids is now made up of biofuels and liquid gas products from the gas industry, right? And so most of what's coming out of gasoline, for example, coming out of the United States now, about 48% of it, so some huge proportion, is now coming from natural liquid gas. Right. Now, so that's a really big inefficiency. But so what that he said, the devil's in the diesel. He did a podcast with Nate Hagen. He's absolutely correct. And under that is marine bunker fuel, and underneath that is the asphalt to do the roads. That's the stuff that's declining. Oil is not recovering. Right. When you actually look at the graph, peak oil was indeed November 2018, and it's going down. But the total liquids is going up because we're getting gasoline from biofuels.
And that's from human food.
Yeah.
And natural gas.
Yeah, natural gas, or natural gas products.
So 6 of one, half on the other. It's coming out of something, you know. I mean,
Yeah. So what it means is the idea of what we call peak oil has to evolve is one thing, but the other one is it's happening. It's happening now, and we're covering it up with the good old fashioned Band-Aid on a bullet wound.
Yeah.
This chart here, the Rystad energy chart, it's interesting that Rystad estimates we have about 500 gigabarrels total left, right? But they say that we're using about 25 gigabarrels a year.
I think they were saying 30.
Maybe it's 30, but anyway, I've taken data from the IEA and EIA. My numbers come out to about 700 gigabarrels, but we're using 36 gigabarrels a year. So interestingly enough, it turns out to be exactly the same number of years left. And the only difference really is that natural gas liquids and refinery gains that give the appearance of more oil on the market than there is. And of course, it's kind of the cheap, worthless stuff at the top is where that's coming from. But in any case, it really still comes down to about 20 years left. And that's, perfectly smooth
but
all the way to the end.
Yeah. Another notable thing is that the speculative reserves increased, but actually the proven reserves and the probable reserves decreased. So the proven reserves decreased by, if I remember, like 15 billion barrels, and the probable reserves reduced by 48 billion barrels. And we only extracted 30 billion barrels. So I don't know if those 15 billion probable barrels were turned out to be fake, or if we use that energy in order to actually produce the oil.
Yeah. So the interesting thing here too is that Rystad does a sort of bottom-up estimate where they take the reserves for every country and add them up, whereas the way I did it was I looked at total discoveries worldwide, got the cumulative total discoveries and cumulative production, took the difference, and that's how I came up with it. And of course, mine also corrects for the the sudden gains in discoveries in the Middle East in the 1980s and a few other corrections. But so it's also kind of interesting that we can come at it from two different approaches and get very similar results.
Yeah. I have a question from a YouTuber for Simon, from Joachim van Wing. Of all the measures being rolled out right now, with 2050 being an end goal, which of all current investment changes and conversions would you recommend throttling back? As in, put differently, out of everything we're doing right now, which action does the most irreversible harm and should be stopped at once?
I think it's hello, Joachim. That's an interesting one. I would say the push for the current renewable track and the current renewable technologies should be stopped. So much is going into that, and whatever overruns it, whatever is the next generation of technology beyond that should be looked at. Like, have a Toyota, for example, has just released a new ammonia-driven engine, and if that works, if it even works a bit, then that's what we should be chasing, and we go everything into how do we produce that ammonia without using fossil fuels, which there are many things we can do if we scale back.
My understanding,
so green transition, scrap it, do something else.
My understanding is we have a limitation on ammonia because we need it for fertilizer for agriculture.
That's another thing that's got to go. Right, industrial agriculture is degrading the arable land at a frightening rate, and it's the point where we're going to have to stop using it, very shortly, or it will stop us. So we need to get off that. Then there is the question, well, if we do need to use ammonia, we just need to make more of it. Now, things like Iceland, for example, has so much geothermal energy, it's making aluminium. Stop making aluminium, make ammonia instead. How much ammonia would that be? And then that becomes a shipping port. Hawaii could do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so you have multiple places around the planet that could actually become a ammonia production hub that could then be transported to other areas in ships. With you can transport ammonia much easier than hydrogen.
Yes, for sure. Mm-hmm.
And so we're talking about a radical restructuring of everything. There's one of the slides I put together is we want simple solutions. We want like a Band-Aid solution. That we want a quick, magical, one fix everything solution that takes something out, puts something in, and then we all continue with no change in behavior. And we want someone else to make that solution, and we want someone else to pay for it. And once we see it, after denying it exists, we want to take it so we can get rich. Yeah. It's one of my rants I've got going at the moment. It's just I keep finding it everywhere when we're looking at solutions.
Yeah. Just you do it, and then so I don't have to change my lifestyle. Yeah, but that's not going to work, unfortunately. And I'm not sure when the breaking point will be when people realize.
Excuse my French, but fuckwits are making the planet look very messy.
There's huge tribalism there, right? We can just transition to green energy and keep going the way we're going, and everything will be fine.
Go to green paint, it's fine.
Yeah. But even what you were saying with in order to phase out agriculture, as an industrial agriculture, we would have to. One of the big things, we would have to grow in the amount of human rights that we have. Like I made this document, God-given human rights, to try to make it a little more palpable for people, because I was looking at this God-given human rights. There we go. And in it, I have the right to land and housing. And it's got a bunch of Bible quotes here, and they're the Judaic as well. And then also the economic, social rights, like various human rights treaties, and then right to food sovereignty and subsistence farming. And then this is also mostly Old Testament here. And then also treaties. And we would basically need to have these human rights and somehow deal with the real estate investors who are working in exactly the opposite direction with the you will own nothing and be happy, and trying to force everyone into 15-minute cities, which seems to be exactly the opposite way, because there's no way we're going to be able to supply them with food.
Yeah.
So
there's sorry, go on, Leon. Yeah.
So a question for you, Simon. You mentioned about one of the scenarios being robot cars, right? So reducing the fleet of cars and then becoming robot cars and then car sharing. Yeah. But when you're talking to these guys, heads of energy companies and such like, is there any indication that they would talk about degrowth essentially, and actually lowering the consumption? Is there ever any kind of like point where they say, well, actually, Simon, I can't disagree with you, and what do you get into those conversations at all with any of them?
I do. Right, so the stuff I present, I love showing the Club of Rome stuff. This is what's happening, guys. So when I present, there's generally three reactions. First is shock. The second is they can't debunk what I'm showing them, even when they've got the time to do so. And the third question is they ask me what they should do. Now, when we get into what it all means, right? The business model behind every corporation I've come across so far is growth and profit. And the people they report to don't give a shit. Right? Now, I actually saw this in Hong Kong. I was actually at a capital investment group meeting in Hong Kong where in capital venture management, 1,800 millionaires and billionaires looking for ideas of what to do with money. They're all rich. So no matter what happens, the world could burn, but they'll be perfectly fine because they're rich. Right? And they can make money as the world burns. So they don't care. So, and these are the people most corporations report to. What's the mentality they report to? So they're trapped in a system. It's not the choices that they want to make, right? They are the metrics of what they can and cannot do is according to a formula that's in a very narrow window. And if they step outside that window, they're out of a job, right? And so it's not that they disagree with me. And when I start talking about, well, we need to look at the growth guys, they say, well, that's pretty frightening. And it's not that they disagree with me, it's they just don't know what to do. They can't get there. All solutions mean that they don't exist. It's how they feel when you talk to them. And so it's not that they disagree that these issues are there. They just how do we get through this? Like, what should society look like? And the problem is too is all of available scenarios of what growth might look like are not in a form that actually is in a language that the corporate culture can interact with. And sense that there's nothing there yet for them to actually attach to or jump to. And so what they now think and believe a lot of the time is the wheels have to fall off and then they'll do some problem solving. And what they're saying, this is what the market is telling us what to do. And that's how the conversations tend to go. It's not denial, and then they're not being stupid about it. They're very sort of smart cookies, but culturally, they just can't proceed.
Yeah, since we're on the topic of markets, I know Ivor had a question here. Will oil go up in price or down with a looming worldwide recession?
That's the 64 gazillion question. I'm hearing two schools of thought. One's up, one's down.
yeah.
You might find it's not so much about the price, it's availability. Like, will the oil be available? Like, will it be in the market? And when it does get to the market, it will become a strategic asset, which means it will be portioned out in a rationing form as per what the local government thinks. Right? And so it's the wheels fall off. It's not about price, it's about who's your friend. Yeah. That's a grim picture, but changed my mind.
Well, that's a total collapse of the capitalist system, which is the idea that, the stuff flows to where the money is and, whatever the market bids. So that would have to, that would involve a sort of a breakdown of the oil market entirely, which I think is very possible.
And I know someone posted that we're seeing the price of gold going up, and I'm not sure what else. This other item thing.
Oil.
Oh, oil. Oh, and the price of oil is going up.
Yeah, it is going up. I mean, I kind of feel like every time there's serious geopolitical tension, the oil goes up. But I also feel like in some weird way, everybody can feel us. If something happens, we fall into this giant hole of a recession, and then people use less of it because they can't even get it. So it's hard to tell what it's going to do. I mean, I don't know, as commodities get scarcer, at some point they just fall because no one's using it anymore. They just can't really get it easily. So I agree with Simon. Maybe the market sort of breaks down.
Yeah, it's not a market anymore.
No, it becomes kind of like just a kind of a crazy grab it if you can get it. In which case it doesn't become a world of commodity anymore. It becomes kind of this localized thing that, okay, it's really nice if you can get some diesel. It's almost like right now in Gaza, I'm sure, whoever can get some gas or oil or whatever. It's pretty scary.
Oh, that reminds me, actually, we had this video. Basically, won't get into the whole thing, but they're saying that this person is speculating or providing some evidence that the current conflict is because they want to put a gas pipeline going through Haifa and Israel, and it just I'm just wondering, does it even make sense to care about natural gas so much at this stage? Wouldn't it make more sense to do a sustainable transition or something?
It depends who's talking. If you're thinking in terms of you're a geopolitical influencer in a country, or you're sitting on a lot of money, you don't care what country you're in. If you control the natural gas, this is the Russian strategy, by the way. They control pipelines and they control the gas that goes through the pipelines. So what that means is when oil checks out, which it's in the process of doing, we'll have a period of time when we still have gas. For that period of time, lots of nations are just going to fall off the tree, right? And we're only talking a couple of years, but still, it's a couple of years where things get very, very difficult and things crash. And in that time, the world is geopolitically reordered.
And that they want to do that new world order, or that they've been yelling about, or something.
The Great Reset.
Oh, and I remember you were talking about that one currency, and they're trying to do that CDBC, Central Digital Bank Currency. Yeah,
Muppets. The Muppets of Cutthroat Island.
Yeah.
They've talked about it for quite a while, the SBR, or the Central Bank Digital Currency. It's a great idea, except that what is it anyway? It's just a whole new reorder. I mean, I think the scary thing is that everybody jumps into the dollar because they feel like it's a safe currency when things get bad. And the crazy thing about lately is the dollar's going up, oil's going up, and gold is going up all at the same time, which doesn't usually happen. It's usually so people jump, try to find safety. And that's kind of a weird thing that hasn't happened really before. It's just right this last couple months or weeks.
So there's a whole... Oh, sorry, Ivor. There's a bit of a lag. I interrupted. Keep going.
No, I'm just talking about the fact that oil, gold, and the dollar are all kind of going up, which is a really weird phenomenon.
So there's a number of things that have been happening in the last 7 or 8 years, which are in the scary basket. That would never happen. Like during the COVID era, we saw the COVID passport, right? The digital passport. They're ramming it through anyway. The idea of a social credit system. Oh no, only the Chinese will do that. It's been trialed in Australia, in Darwin. Anyway, so there's a whole lot of technology stuff that's actually associated with different things that were considered the sweatier parts. A conspiracy theory that was only discussed in the sweatier parts of the internet are now legislated and are actually out in the open. Right? And there's a whole... This another one of my books, but there's a whole... hang on, can you see? There's a whole lot of...
geoengineering, transhumanism.
There's a whole lot of technology that's actually been promoted now and rolled out now that is an increasingly centralized way. Like all tax returns in G20 countries are going to be merged into one system. What we call the G20 is global governance. Stuff that was considered, a global currency that is now attached. That now we're actually starting to talk about permissions about when you are allowed to use your money in terms of, for example, carbon credits. You've used too much carbon. You shouldn't. That stuff's now been openly discussed in groups like the World Economic Forum. Right. So things are moving really, really goddamn fast.
But my understanding is that it won't really help. Certainly not regular people. But basically, it seems to be that what their plan is to try to get people on this central bank currency and then cut off the poor, so that just the rich people can use the resources.
Right. So essentially, yes, 2 classes of people, rich and poor, but that's always been the case. Like September 11 happened, the world lost its mind collectively, the war on terrorism and all that, And they really stepped up this thing where to get on an aeroplane, you've got to go through security in an airport, to the point where you've got to strip off certain parts of your clothes, and you've got X-ray and everything. Right. But do you know, if you hire a private jet, you don't have to do any of that, either getting on the plane or getting off the plane. So are we really saying that a happening terrorist cannot hire a private jet? So all of that shite that we've been put through for the last 20 years, right, is all about scaring the hell out of the public and containing the public, not actually solving the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And that basic idea is replicated everywhere.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I try not to get too paranoid about a lot of this stuff because there's not much I can do about it. But, you know, I just get this feeling that I can see, you know, like with the Titanic, when the Titanic went down, the first thing they did was lock the third-class passengers under the decks. So, you know, I mean, that was just like, you know, you can't have pandemonium here. We have to maintain, you know, there are not enough lifeboats, you know, and that would have been my relatives, you know. But anyway, the thing is, I just sort of feel like that's natural. They're going to do that. As things go down, things are going to start to happen. And so I kind of feel like those of us of like more limited means and things, we kind of have to figure out a way to make lifeboats out of all the deck chairs that are left around. You know, I mean, that's basically what it is, you know. So we just sort of have to figure out a way to exist in here. And it's very important to know what the heck they're doing. But I don't think it does much good to get very paranoid about it because you know they're going to do it. I mean, whatever, you know, in the Titanic, the White Star Line was probably saying, don't tell anybody that the ship is sinking, you know.
Yeah.
Whatever you do, don't tell anybody, you know.
Yeah, on the Titanic.
Yeah. So I'm feeling like that's what's going on now. Everybody's like, oh, come on. We can't tell anybody what's actually going on. And I kind of like just digging in the internet going, okay, what is actually happening here, you know?
So to what to do with the deck chairs, see, 500 years ago, the average person had a skill set that was more directly involved with growing their own food, or everything they had was made by someone they knew personally. Right, so we've got to go, there's a return back to those sorts of days, but most people, probably the most people in this call wouldn't know how to grow their own food. You know,
I do.
Can you do it from first principles?
Done it for many years.
Well, okay, so the average person then, the average person wouldn't know where to start, wouldn't know what to do. You know, it would be dependent on tools that are given to them. You know, seeds in a packet. They wouldn't understand concepts like seed sharing. No.
Yeah. It's a 5-year learning curve to grow your own food.
Oh, yeah, at least.
And you have to have enough land.
It's cultural, too, because, you know, I'm Swedish-American, so my grandfather was always into this, and then my father was into it, and then it becomes kind of a cultural thing, and I talk to the old Yankee people who live around here, and it's part of their culture. But most people, I've been going around talking to people, you know, I was running for office and stuff. Most people live in a trailer park around here. They live in their little trailer. They have no access to the ground that's around them or underneath them. So they even, you know, most people here in the rural area have no access to doing it. And they haven't done it for 3 generations now. So they don't have the first clue how to grow a garden. It's sad.
I wanted to point out, hopefully for any elites watching this, that really the perfect citizen you want is someone who has enough land to grow their own food, because then they could sell the surplus or give, you know, for taxes or whatever. And if people have good human rights, you know, where they have enough land to grow their own food and they're growing their own food, it's actually better for everyone. You don't need like police to enforce anything because they're not stealing food or anything like that. They don't need to commit crimes to meet their basic needs. So actually human rights and being nice to people helps everyone, not just the poor, but also the rich. And so it's a better life for everybody.
Question. If you had a society full of people who were full of love and compassion and knew how to grow their own food and weren't afraid, how would they be controlled?
Yes.
Well, you wouldn't have to. That's the point, is because you wouldn't need to defend yourself since they'd be on their plots growing their own food.
Yeah. Well, I when I walked around, it was interesting. I was walking around campaigning and stuff, and I met I came along one little area. I went back, and there was this one little place, and there were all sorts of gardens and things going on, and people were there. These people were there living on their little plot and growing food, etc. And I found out they were Finnish Americans.
Mm.
So 2 generations later, they were still sort of living in that situation. But who knows if their kids are going to do it? You know, who knows what happens after that?
Mm-hmm.
It's sad.
And this one is the water pump thing, and that, you know, instead of using our resources for war, we could be reforesting the Levant, and then people would have somewhere to live, because right now they're over capacity. There's more desert than can be sustained the population.
The biotic pump, and that's one thing the Israelis are doing, is they are reforesting up high, up the highlands, which is a really good idea.
In the Negev desert.
Yeah, well, all over. I mean, everywhere. You know, it's a very small country, but at least one thing they're doing is reforesting the highlands. And if you reforest the highlands, the theory is with the biotic pump is that water will actually come up the hill to where those trees are and drop it. And you see it every day in Maine, because we on the offshore islands we see thunderstorms starting, but they're inland and they're up. So all that water from the ocean comes up and goes up onto hills and drops. And so I think a lot of civilizations have died because they cut all the trees in their highlands. It dried up, and that was the story of the end of the
Middle East and northern Africa, and now Spain and Italy. Greece. Well, I don't want to keep you guys too long. Were there any last things we wanted to talk about before we round up?
All I would say is I've learned a lot in the last 2 years about people responding to my work, and that's told me what has to happen, and where it has to happen, where it can't happen, who's going to do it, and who won't do it. Right? And I'm actually taking that information and I'm using it to develop my next step.
I think it's great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's really wonderful. And also I wanted to one last thing share that part of what you were saying with the Israelis is that at least they are doing the drip irrigation, and so they're with a kind of a multicultural Levant region. You know, there could be a place for everybody. You know, everyone has a valuable contribution that they can make, and so let us remember that we can have a good future. And it has to do with not living in fear, but living in praise of what we already have, and then helping cultivate more of that. Like we still have forests, we still have food production, we still have functional communities. You know, we can go there and help and support those people, and you know, grow more food and things like that. And so, all right. So we leave you in the love and in the light of the one infinite Creator. And go forth, therefore, rejoicing in the power and the peace of the one infinite Creator.
Thank you, guys. Very interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. I ended the stream.